medical surveillance networks and global health agencies are currently analyzing data from a series of high-mortality hantavirus events that have emerged in the first half of 2026, marking a significant escalation in the lethality of recent outbreaks compared to historical averages. While hantaviruses are a known family of rodent-borne pathogens, the current epidemiological situation in South America and a recent cluster linked to international travel have drawn intense scrutiny due to a case fatality rate that far exceeds that of common seasonal respiratory infections. Reports from Argentina and international monitoring bodies indicate that a specific lineage of the virus is demonstrating a mortality rate of approximately 34 to 40% in confirmed cases. To put this in a clinical perspective that viewers can grasp, the seasonal influenza virus typically maintains a mortality rate well below 0.1%. This makes the current hantavirus developments significantly more lethal for those who contract the severe form of the disease, known as Hantavirus Pulmonary Syndrome, or HPS. The primary focus of recent reporting centers on the Andes virus, a specific strain of hantavirus native to South America, which has seen a sharp increase in activity since mid-2025. In Argentina alone, official data suggests that between June 2025 and May 2026, the country recorded approximately 101 deaths related to the infection. Historical data for this region usually places the national average fatality rate between 10 and 32%, but the current window has seen this figure climb toward 38% in specific clusters. This spike in mortality has raised questions among public health officials regarding potential environmental shifts, changes in rodent population mix, or variations in the viral genome that may be influencing the severity of the disease. Plus one, the framing of this issue is not one of a looming global pandemic similar to the 2020 era, but rather a localized and severe public health threat that demands specialized medical response. Hantaviruses are members of the Bunyaviridae family and are categorized based on the geographic region and the primary organ systems that they target. In the Americas, the New World strains primarily cause HPS, characterized by a rapid and often catastrophic failure of the respiratory system. In Europe and Asia, Old World strains more frequently manifest as hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome, or HFRS, which targets the kidneys. The current focus on the Andes strain is particularly critical because it is one of the few hantaviruses documented to have the capability for limited human-to-human transmission, a factor that complicates containment efforts in confined settings. As we track the developments of 2026, the focus remains on why this specific strain is exhibiting such high survival limits and what the data reveals about the current risks to travelers and residents in affected zones. The core developments of the 2026 hantavirus situation reached a critical point in early May when the World Health Organization received notification of a cluster of severe respiratory illnesses aboard the international cruise ship MV Hondias. The vessel, which departed from Ushuaia, Argentina, on March 20, 2026, became the center of a multi-country investigation involving the World Health Organization, the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and health authorities in the United Kingdom and the Netherlands. As of the second week of May, the cluster includes at least 8 cases, consisting of 6 laboratory-confirmed infections and 2 probable cases. Of these 8 individuals, 3 have died, resulting in a case fatality ratio of 38% for this specific event. Laboratory testing conducted via polymerase chain reaction and viral sequencing has confirmed that the pathogen responsible is hantavirus. Plus one, the timeline of the outbreak highlights the rapid progression and the logistical challenges of managing such a high-consequence pathogen in a mobile environment. The TX case reportedly experienced the onset of symptoms on April 6 while the ship was at sea and later died. A second case involving a traveler who had also toured South America but before experienced a rapid clinical deterioration during a flight to Johannesburg, South Africa, on April 25 and subsequently passed away. These cases illustrate the primary clinical progression of HPS. Patients typically present with a prodromal phase of fever, severe muscle aches, and gastrointestinal distress, Within days, however, the disease can progress into a critical phase characterized by pneumonia, acute respiratory distress syndrome, and shock. At this stage, the lungs fill with fluid, making oxygen exchange nearly impossible without mechanical ventilation and intensive care support. Plus, 3 officials from the World Health Organization, including Maria Van Kerkhove, the Director of Epidemic and Pandemic Preparedness, have issued statements to clarify the level of risk. While acknowledging the high mortality rate, officials emphasize that this is not a broad public threat comparable to influenza or COVID-19 because the virus does not spread easily through casual contact or typical respiratory droplets. Instead, infection usually requires direct exposure to aerosolized particles from rodent excreta or, in the rare case of the Andes strain, very close and prolonged contact between individuals. Despite the limited spread, the severity of each case necessitates a high-level response. Lab teams in affected regions are prioritizing rapid symptom screening and the isolation of suspected cases to prevent further transmission. Current data from the region of the Americas for 2025 shows 229 documented cases and 59 deaths across 8 countries, underscoring that while the virus is rare, its impact on the individual is frequently life-threatening. As health agencies continue their surveillance, the focus of public health guidance remains grounded in environmental management and the understanding of viral reservoirs. Hantavirus is primarily a zoonotic disease, meaning it lives in animal populations, specifically rodents, without causing illness in the host. In South America, the long-tailed pygmy rice rat is a known reservoir for the Andes strain. Human infection occurs most frequently when people enter enclosed spaces where rodents have nested. As they clean or move items, they stir up dust contaminated with dried urine or droppings, which is then inhaled. This aerosolization mechanism is the most common path of transmission. Prevention strategies currently endorsed by the CDC and WHO focus on minimizing this exposure. This includes using a 10% bleach solution to disinfect areas before cleaning, avoiding the use of brooms or vacuums that can kick up dust, and ensuring that homes and storage buildings are properly ventilated and sealed against rodent entry. Plus one, there are currently no licensed vaccines or specific antiviral treatments for hantavirus infections anywhere in the world. This lack of a silver bullet means that survival depends heavily on early clinical recognition and immediate transfer to a facility equipped with a full intensive care unit. Medical centers are being advised to monitor for hantavirus-like symptoms in patients who have recently traveled to high-risk areas or worked in rural settings. The limitations of our current knowledge remain a significant factor. Researchers are still investigating why the Andes strain uniquely allows for person-to-person spread and how climate variability, such as shifting rainfall patterns in Argentina, is influencing the frequency of these outbreaks. The 2026 State of the World's Animal Health Report is expected to further detail the links between environmental encroachment and the rise in these zoonotic events. In closing, while the headline mortality rates of 38 to 40% are statistically alarming, they reflect the severity of the disease in those infected rather than the likelihood of a widespread epidemic. Public health officials maintain that for the general population, the risk of exposure remains low. The current strategy is one of targeted surveillance, rapid laboratory confirmation, and the strengthening of rural healthcare infrastructure to manage the intensive care needs of those affected. Vigilance is advised for travelers and residents in known habitats, but health agencies stress that informed prevention remains the most effective tool against this high-consequence pathogen. For more updates on global health surveillance and emerging viral data, consider subscribing to this channel. The core developments surrounding the reported increase in hantavirus mortality center on the rigorous validation processes currently underway within international laboratory networks and public health agencies. When a new strain is identified or a mortality spike is observed, organizations such as the World Health Organization and the Pan American Health Organization activate standardized surveillance protocols to differentiate between localized clusters and a broader epidemiological shift. Central to this investigation is the genomic sequencing of the virus to determine if specific mutations have occurred that might increase its virulence or alter its transmission efficiency. Unlike seasonal influenza, which undergoes constant antigenic drift and shift allowing for rapid global spread, hantaviruses are typically stable within their specific rodent reservoirs. A reported new strain implies a deviation from the established genetic lineages of known viruses, like the Sin Nombre virus in North America or the Andes virus in South America. Scientists utilize high-containment biosafety Level 4 laboratories to handle these samples, as the high mortality rate and lack of effective vaccines necessitate the highest level of biocontainment. The diagnostic process begins with enzyme-linked immunosorbent assays, or ELISA, to detect specific antibodies, followed by polymerase chain reaction tests to identify viral RNA in the blood or tissue. These results are then cross-referenced with clinical outcomes to verify if the case fatality rate truly exceeds historical benchmarks, which for Hantavirus Pulmonary Syndrome have traditionally hovered between 30 and 40%. In the clinical setting, the progression of this new strain is being monitored for any deviation from the standard pathology of the disease. In hospitals and specialized respiratory clinics, medical professionals are documenting the transition from the prodromal phase to the critical stage of the illness. The initial symptoms, fever, chills, and severe myalgia, often mimic common viral infections, including the flu. However, the development of hantavirus is characterized by a unique and devastating mechanism. The virus targets the endothelial cells that line the blood vessels. As the infection progresses, it causes a systemic increase in vascular permeability, leading to what is known as capillary leak syndrome. This results in the rapid accumulation of fluid in the lungs, causing acute respiratory distress. Unlike the flu, which primarily causes death through secondary bacterial pneumonia or exacerbation of underlying conditions, hantavirus causes death through direct pulmonary failure and cardiogenic shock. Because this transition can occur in as little as 24 to 48 hours after the onset of respiratory symptoms, the burden on intensive care units is immense. Reports from regional health authorities indicate that survival often depends entirely on the availability of advanced life support, including extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, or ECMO, which temporarily takes over the function of the heart and lungs to allow the patient's body a window for recovery. The claim that this strain is deadlier than any flu is supported by a stark contrast in clinical data. While a severe pandemic flu might have a mortality rate of 2 to 3%, the current hantavirus reporting points toward a survival limit that is much narrower. This distinction is critical for public health communication. While the flu is highly contagious and spreads easily through respiratory droplets, hantavirus remains a relatively rare infection that requires specific environmental conditions to jump from rodents to humans. Consequently, the high mortality rate is balanced by a lower overall incidence rate. Nevertheless, the logistics of managing these cases remain a priority for health departments. Surveillance efforts are not only focusing on human cases, but also on zoonotic monitoring, which involves trapping and testing rodent populations in areas reporting human infections. By analyzing the prevalence of the virus in the natural reservoir, agencies can issue targeted warnings to specific sectors, such as agriculture, forestry, and rural tourism. This data-driven approach helps to mitigate the impact of the virus while researchers work to understand the underlying factors, whether environmental, such as the masting of certain plants that leads to rodent population explosions, or biological, that are driving the current record-high mortality figures. As the medical community confronts the statistical reality of these record-high mortality rates, the focus of public health efforts has shifted toward rigorous prevention and the strengthening of global surveillance infrastructure. Because there is currently no specialized vaccine or universally effective antiviral treatment for hantavirus, the primary line of defense remains, and in environmental hygiene, environment of the disruption of the zoonotic transmission cycle. Public health agencies, including the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control, emphasize that hantaviruses are enveloped viruses, meaning they are relatively fragile in the environment. and can be deactivated by common disinfectants. However, the risk lies in the method of cleaning. Practical guidance strictly advises against sweeping or vacuuming areas where rodent activity is suspected, as these actions aerosolize viral particles, allowing them to be inhaled. Instead, officials recommend a wet cleaning protocol, saturating affected areas with a 10% bleach solution or a high-concentration disinfectant for at least 5 minutes before wiping. This practical takeaway is vital for those in rural agricultural sectors or individuals reopening seasonal cabins and storage sheds where rodent populations may have nested during colder months. Surveillance mechanisms are also being upgraded to a One Health model, which integrates human medical data with veterinary and environmental monitoring. By tracking the population density of rodent reservoirs, such as the deer mouse in North America or the long-tailed pygmy rice rat in South America, health officials can predict mast years where an abundance of natural food sources leads to a surge in the rodent population and a subsequent increase in human risk. This proactive surveillance allows for the issuance of localized health alerts before a cluster of human cases even begins. Furthermore, the 2026 reporting cycle highlights the importance of laboratory capacity in developing nations. Rapid diagnostic testing is the only way to differentiate a lethal hantavirus infection from a standard respiratory illness in its early, treatable stages. While there is no cure, early supportive care in an intensive care unit, including the management of fluid balance and oxygenation, remains the only proven method to lower the mortality rate for an infected individual. Despite these efforts, significant limits to our knowledge persist. Virologists remain uncertain as to why certain lineages, particularly the Andes strain, have demonstrated the capacity for limited person-to-person transmission, while others remain strictly zoonotic. There is also ongoing debate regarding the efficacy of early-stage antiviral interventions, such as ribavirin, which has shown mixed results in clinical trials for Hantavirus Pulmonary Syndrome. This uncertainty underscores the need for continued investment in basic virology and the development of monoclonal antibody treatments that could potentially neutralize the virus before the onset of the catastrophic capillary leak phase. Until such breakthroughs occur, the public health message remains focused on high vigilance and risk mitigation for those living in or traveling to endemic regions. Ethically, the reporting of these record-high mortality rates requires a careful balance. As senior news editors, the objective is to provide the public with the facts necessary for safety without inciting undue alarm. While the data indicates this strain is statistically deadlier than any common flu, the probability of infection for the average person remains extremely low compared to respiratory viruses that spread through casual contact. The ethical imperative is to inform the public that while the virus is severe, it is also avoidable through simple, science-based precautions. This report serves as a reminder that in the face of emerging pathogens, transparency and preparedness are the most effective tools for preservation. By understanding the survival limits of the virus and the mechanisms of its spread, global health networks aim to contain these outbreaks before they can escalate into broader crises. For continuing coverage on global health surveillance and updates on emerging viral trends, ensure